Hello, welcome to the Creative Resistance Podcast. I'm Scott Cassidy, and each episode sees me chat to beautiful humans who are using creativity to shine a light on the things that matter. This week, I'm joined by Keiran Goddard. Keiran's a novelist, poet, and social theorist who has gifted the world with 2 poetry collections and the phenomenal novels HOURGLASS and I See Buildings Fall Like Lightning. The latter has just been made into a feature film shot and cast in Shardin, Birmingham, and Keiran and I dive deep into this and so much more in the conversation to follow. We talk class identity, social mobility, echo chambers, friendship, and the importance of change being rooted in love. There's a full bio in the show notes and links to where you can follow and connect with Keiran too. My questions are a bit rambly, but Keiran is sharp as a tack, and I do hope you enjoy the conversation. Cheers. A very warm welcome to the Creative Resistance Podcast to Keiran Goddard. Before we get started, how are you, mate? How are you doing?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks for having me. Really pleased to be here.
Delighted that you're here to chat all things creativity, and it's good to have you here. So get stuck straight in. There's a common theme that is definitely creeping up when I'm chatting to male poets, to male novelists. You wear both of those hats. And that is that in their early stages of writing, they felt there was a real risk to putting their hand up and saying, I am a poet. I like to write stories. I had one chap, an amazing poet who uses poetry in his sort of work within the youth justice system, who said he literally felt like he was risking getting a black eye going to school every day with his book of poems. I've had other people say it was a real issue for them. And I personally kept my own writing hidden for a number of years, both as a child and then I was in the fire service for a while, and it's not the done thing to be a fireman who's chatting about writing poetry. So I'm really intrigued about your creative roots and what gave you permission, if you like, to announce yourself as a poet and a writer.
That's a really interesting observation. I would say in the grand scheme of things, I came to writing relatively late, in the sense that I came to other people's writing relatively late. I didn't really read at all until I was about 15, 16. Was the first time I really read a book. I was pretty much interested in like fighting and girls, really. Really narrow but important set of interests. And it's a kind of, to some extent, a sort of predictable story, but I had a very brilliant and life-changing English teacher who gave me a book, said you might like this, and I stayed up all night reading it. Actually, I can remember it incredibly vividly, and this feeling of like, oh my God, like, why did nobody tell me? Like, why did nobody tell me that these existed and that there are hundreds of them and thousands of them? And then I was pretty relentless, from then on. But in terms of my own writing and the permissions, emotionally and socially that, one feels they need to have, that came a lot later, I think. And the kind of vector for understanding it was through music. I was really, really, really into music, and I kind of understood that people like me from places like I was from made music, right? I knew they could write songs. Like I had models for that. I was like, okay, yeah, they look like lads, and they're writing songs. So I had this deep obsession with songwriting and lyrics and all the rest of it. This is a bit of a shaggy dog story, but so that persisted. And after university, I was a kind of, I suppose, professional or semi-professional musician for a little while. And it was during the MySpace days, like the heydays of MySpace. And we were on a UK sort of tour thing. And someone at our record label suggested that each town we went to, I should write a little like diary entry, and I couldn't bear the thought of it. I couldn't bear the thought of, and then we went to Manchester and this happened, or to Leeds and this happened. And so I started just writing these kind of almost deliberately surreal sort of prose poems, these kind of abstract prose poems. I was already writing song lyrics at this point. And And the response that I got from these, you know, from the writing divorced from the music was such that I thought, I began to think for the first time, actually, maybe I can just do the writing. Maybe I don't have to, maybe it doesn't have to be in the context of a, of a song. So that was the way I broke through in terms of giving myself that permission. It was kind of tricked myself into it.
Yeah, I love it. Do you know what? It's such a common story, I think, for young lads especially, that music gave them the permission to do that. And certainly for me, I mean, I didn't play an instrument when I was younger, but, it felt okay to write poetry if I called it lyrics, for sure. So a couple of questions that sprang to mind straight off there. One, what was the book that actually captured your attention? Can you remember?
I can, and I wish it were a different answer, because it sounds simultaneously pretentious and like a lie. But it was Camus' Outsider.
Oh, I love it. Love it.
Perfect age for that kind of thing. And also, there was the Cure song that was based on it. So that was an in for me. And also, it's only like 120 pages or something. So that was helpful.
So I was expecting like a kind of sort of train spotting-esque answer, something that was quite zeitgeisty. But that's perfectly perfect. So, and then secondly, what genre of music? What was your kind of musician life?
In terms of playing?
Yeah. What did you actually do?
Yeah, I mean, it was lyric forward. At least I thought it was. And what's a good way of describing it? I thought we were like a kind of Birmingham version of the Pogues. That was the aim. It was multi-instrumental. There was quite a lot of us. 7 or so different kind of folk-based instruments. But looking back now, it's actually sounds more like a kind of sub Arcade Fire.
Okay.
But it was in that kind of space. It was during that era when, it was impossible to think that a song could be good unless it had like an accordion on it or something.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, it was in that era.
And both bands that have sort of good storytelling at the heart of what they do as well. So, which I'm sure is something that you did with your lyrics as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've recently. I was asked to give a small talk about the relationship between songs and my latest book, and I was thinking particularly about the song "Rainy Night in Soho" by the Pogues.
Beautiful, yeah.
And it clarified something for me, actually, in terms of what writing I really, really admire, the kind of like boldness, the emotional clarity. And it's the way that in that first verse, Shane McGowan uses the word "fell" 3 times in succession. And, we watched our friends grow up together and we saw them as they fell, and some of them fell into heaven, some of them fell into hell. And to have the confidence to just repeat the word, because it's the correct word, and to not seek alternative words. And then also watch the meaning of the word "fell" transform in each of its instances, because it means 3 subtly different things in those. I was like, actually, that's the best lyric I know, for all its simplicity. Because it just has such like emotional and literary confidence to do that. So that's an aside, but
no, do you know what I said? It's a really valid aside. I think Shane McGowan is well, I was basically the most underrated, but of course he's massively rated. But I don't think he gets quite enough credit for being the genius storyteller he was. And sometimes it is that the simplicity. He has some lyrics that I absolutely love. Again, it sounds, if anyone else has written it, it could be quite twee, but what is it he says? And as the sunset came to me, as the evening came to me, the sunset on the hill all around, I told you I'll always love you. I always will. I've butchered that, but words to that effect. And it's so simple, but coming from him in the midst of a song, it says so much. So yeah, I love that.
No, I agree. Totally agree.
Yeah, and there's
RIP.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, so that was the kind of introduction, and I'm sure this next kind of point that I want to dig into is probably quite cliched for you, and I'm sure it's something you've been asked before. But am I right in saying, so you grew up in the Shard End area of Birmingham, is that right? And then went on to attend Oxford Uni. And I'm not going to ask you just about that kind of journey, from Shard End to Oxford. But I'd love to know a little bit more about how your sense of identity changed throughout that time. Did you find that you were a bit chameleon-esque and had to change how you portrayed yourself, even internally to yourself and to others? And has that changed at different points of your creative life?
Oh, wow.
It's a big question, so
Yeah.
happy to go
No, no.
round
I
the
mean,
houses.
it's a great question. I mean, just to put a few things on the table that I think are helpful there. So I went to university through a scheme that no longer exists, right? As for it kind of exists in a form, but there were all kinds of access schemes for children from families who had never been to university, children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds or with complex needs. So it's important to say that for all their limitations, even those things don't exist anymore, which is sad. For me, I had quite a simple approach to it. Like the idea that I would get to read books, which I'd recently discovered, for 3 years, seems staggering to me. Like it didn't seem like a life option that was possible, 2 or 3 years previously. And I didn't realize this at the time. It's something I've come to understand more recently, with some degree of shame, I must say. Like I all I wanted to do was escape. All I wanted to do was escape. And I saw words and literature and writing as the mechanism for that escape. And I felt it the moment I first stumbled on them. It felt like opening a book of spells and thinking, if I just stick with this, if I stick close with this, my life will change. I had that distinct feeling. And I didn't realize, as I say at the time, but this was an era of like Blairite social mobility. I often mention that it was the era of the National Lottery launch as well. These endless adverts of like this giant finger coming out of the sky and it could be you. And I think that is like really reson with the overall like atmosphere. If you jump through the right hoops, if you behave yourself in a certain way, if you're willing to make X amount of compromises in certain directions, you might get to rise out of your class. But under no circumstances will you ever get to rise with your class.
Fascinating.
That was the Blairite deal, which I now see as like deeply destructive. In all kinds of ways. And I was part of that, kind of unwittingly, I guess, as a sort of 16-year-old. I had internalized the notion that to succeed means to leave.
Yeah, to sort of other yourself almost from where you said, yeah. And did it feel like an escape when you actually got there?
No, not really. It was relatively alienating, as you might imagine. I didn't have the language or the framework for this at the time, but what I was witnessing was a sort of a class strata recomposing itself in real time, and that was just, I was just like, hang on, what's happening here? What's my position here? I managed through a mixture of like childhood trauma and pathology to respond to that by essentially just growing a massive chip on my shoulder about it. And rather than shrinking away, I took the view, which again, is not something I'm particularly enamored or proud of as an adult, but I took the view, fuck you, get out of my way. I'm better than you. Your parents paid for this and you're still stupid. I know all the people I knew in Shard End and Birmingham could run rings around you in terms of like intellect, wit, imagination. That was kind of my stance, really, which was a protective stance, I can see in retrospect. But it was kind of useful, like it kind of got me through. Which isn't to say that I had a miserable time. And I had some friends who are still friends now, and the prospect of reading books and thinking about them was incredible. But to give some sense of how that plays out in real terms, I remember this moment where everyone graduated, and they suddenly, all these people I knew and I kind of thought of as contemporaries, they all just went into, internships or law conversions, or they went into the city. And I hadn't even thought of that. Like I went and worked in a bookshop, um, because that seemed like the next logical thing to do. I just hadn't considered the sort of psychosocial or socioeconomic kind of framework I was in. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's
no, it does absolutely. It's interesting as well. You're saying that stance is something you're not proud of, but I think to flip that on its head, I think you should be a little bit proud of that, because I've seen plenty of people that have. I'm not saying be proud of the kind of like fuck you stance, but I've seen plenty of people go into those situations and feel the pressure and succumb to the pressure to kind of morph themselves into kind of the people they're surrounded with, and then therefore become something that's completely untrue to themselves, to others, and then there's that sense of like, well, you never really fit in because you're pretending and you're never going to quite be like that. But it's fascinating what you said. It's something that resonates with me as well. Both my wife and I were state school, went away to uni, met at uni. And our kind of peer group at uni was mostly from, sort of mid-level Scottish private schools, and all good folk and some great friends that I'm still friends with to this day. But that thing of when we left, like so many people were bought a flat or given a job at, and we're like, what is this? And all of a sudden that difference became apparent again, having felt like it wasn't there for a few years. So I think those things do stick with you, don't they?
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, it's a topic I've ended up talking about quite a lot over the last couple of years because the topic of my latest novel. But one thing I often mention is I recently, about a kind of year ago, I learned the word contronym. You know this word contronym?
No, I don't.
It's a word that also means its own opposite. So an example might be dust, which can mean to remove dust, but also to sprinkle dust.
Yeah. Love it.
And once you start thinking about it, there's like quite a lot of contronyms. It's quite a fun game for nerds. But there's a contronym that I love which is cleave, right? Which can mean to pull apart or to hold on, right? You can cleave a piece of wood, or you can cleave to your loved one. And that thing you just described with you and your partner, that's how I think of this social mobility question. Is it's cleaving in both sense of the words. You're pulled apart and you're sort of grasping inwards, and the net result of that is you're never fully accepted in the world you move to, and you can never really go home. So you end up like a ghost haunting the edges of two different lives, and that's another sort of sediment that is embedded in that kind of what I now see as like quite a tragic sort of social mode, is you never really get to go home, and your new home never really kind of accepts you fully. Cleaved,
Yeah, I love that. I've learned a new word as well, which is always good. Yeah, and am I right in saying then, so that's fascinating to hear that bit about the background. Am I right in saying that you now, in your non-writing life, if you like, you work within a sort of academic sphere of social change? Can you talk to me a little bit about that and kind of what the focus of that is?
Yeah, so without going into too many specifics, I basically work on research that relates to the future of work, so shorter working time, the 4-day week, trade unionism, automation, AI, labour rights, and so on. To put it in broad terms, anything that I think puts its thumb on the scale for labour relative to capital, thereby doing something to reverse the 70-year deepening inequity between those two social forces, is in the tent. Or I sometimes joke my wage labour job is attempting to eliminate wage labour, which is the only noble wage labour job that can exist. So yeah, it's that's kind of some of what I do in that sphere.
I love it. And do you see any direct links between ending up in that sphere and that experience you had of moving between two very different worlds, moving from home to university? Do you see some of those links?
Yeah, I think so. And and even prior to that, I think the way my sort of personal politics were, shaped as a young person, working class family, quite a politicized family, Irish roots, which, obviously shapes you in lots of ways, not least your relationship to colonialism. But yeah, I always had a sense of myself as a working class person. And through that lens, before I had any theoretical kind of understanding of it, I definitely had a felt sense of the deep imbalance of power and exploitation that exists between labor and capital. And so when it came to what interests me kind of academically or from a research point of view, it made sense to go in that direction, because it's bluntly one of the things I care about, most in the world. Good work is, it's a subcategory of a good life, right? And without wanting to be a complete kind of parody of myself, like Marx had it right. He defined, the realm of freedom and the realm of necessity in a human life, and the task would seem to me to be to expand the realm of freedom in human life and to delimit or shrink the realm of necessity, so that we can live more and love more and have more whole lives. So it's a political commitment, but it's a political commitment based in a philosophical, arguably even religious commitment to life. And
that's definitely it's a really beautiful way to look at it as well. And I think I first became aware of yourself after reading Hourglass, but I think just it sounds like a bit of an aside, but a real skill I've noticed of yours, and just even I'm thinking about social media here, is your ability to you've made me stop on several occasions to think outside of the echo chamber. This sounds really silly, but something as simple as you will sometimes share stories on Instagram and you'll overlay them with a lot more writing than a lot of people do to give some kind of thoughts on stuff. And quite often I found myself stopping to read that, and it's made me go, oh, hang on a minute. Like, it's made me think about things differently rather than just kind of beating the drum and hitting share and everyone sort of going, yeah, I'm outraged about that. And I think it's something that carries over into your fictional work as well. And I sometimes think that, fiction, poetry even, can shine a more sort of usable or truthful light on some of these big issues than that kind of more detailed theory or academic work. So yeah, just an observation, but I think it's something you do incredibly well in both spheres.
Oh, well, thanks, Scott. That's it's nice to know it's not just into the void. That's and I think you're right. I think they do inform each other in interesting ways because, firstly, there's the symbolism, the precision of language that comes with a commitment to poetry, can help you pinpoint something politically or economically in language that is both accurate but also hopefully powerful. And then in the other direction, from the political into the literary, I would say that most politics, I'm being like knowingly vague here, but like most politics is kind of downstream from a range of human emotions, right? Like arguably that, they are emergent properties of fear or hope, or all of these other things. Like politics kind of grows out of, subjects and their emotions. And I think literature is an incredible space to, if we consider politics to be like the weeds and the flowers, then I think the mud from which the weeds and the flowers grow is where literature does its work, in the messiness, in the emotion, in the emergent properties. The moment it becomes like overtly contemporaneous and sort of propagandistic, it dies on the vine. I think like it has to exist in that, that messier space. So I do think there's a kind of hopefully productive relationship between those two sort of modes of thinking and writing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a spectrum, isn't it? It's kind of, there's that clarity in the middle for sure. One of the things I noticed that you've shared a bit about recently, and I thought it was interesting hearing that you did some work in sort of trade unionism, because I've noticed yourself and other authors wearing the Readers and Writers Against Genocide t-shirts, and they look very kind of like a sort of trade union type t-shirt, and it's sort of a collective response to something. Can you tell me a little bit more about that project and how that works?
I mean, that project in particular is something that, I was just asked to, represent, I guess, where,
Okay.
I was happy to do that. But it's, I would say, part of a bigger type of collective action that's been happening, in the writing space around the genocide of Palestine. And that has taken quite a few forms. Obviously, there's sort of incredible work that's been done by sort of colleagues and comrades in Fossil Free Books. Incredible both in its dedication and also its effectiveness. There's other initiatives like Readers and Writers Against Genocide, and then there's been a lot of kind of one-off like events and fundraisers and so on that I've been involved in in organising. And I do think, maybe we can come back to the issue itself, but just this issue you mentioned of collective organising, I think one of those things is about getting writers to understand themselves as a collective of workers, right? Because you are taught to think of yourself as a kind of isolated, artist in a shed, who should probably be grateful to have this ability to expel your emotions onto the page. And actually, it's labor, it's work at every level of the chain, not just the writer, but the bookseller, the person who has to produce the paper, the person who delivers the books. Like, this is a chain of labor with value, and the way that you change things in the context of a labor chain is by collective action and leveraging yourself as workers. Because what I would say is, while, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine you're in a similar sort of space here. It's like, I've dedicated my entire life to books and to being a writer at the expense of a million other kinds of lives that we might have had, right? And the reason I do that is because then nothing matters to me more, right? But what you come to realize is that writing and art generally is reified theologically and spiritually in that way, precisely so it can be devalued materially, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But those two things are intimately connected, and we work. I work effectively for $1 billion publishing conglomerate. What leverage do I have other than collectively, with other workers? And what the last couple of years have shown is actually you have a lot of leverage. If you act collectively, because you can withdraw your labor, and without your labor there is no festival, there is no there's no books.
Absolutely. No, I think that's such a good example, and I think in a world gone crazy and tips upside down like we're living in at the minute as well, I think there's power in the art that's created, but it's also funding to create that art is also the first thing that's stripped away when things get tough. And I often wonder whether that's a conscious thing to strip away the power from the collective, or whether it's just that the certain people that are in charge don't value creativity in the arts. But I think it feels like a constant battle, Yeah,
100%. I mean, I'm trying to resist going off on a 3-hour rant about this, but I'd like a couple of things on that I would put on the table are: one, precise. Yeah, I agree with that. Let's take, for example, the issue around the Palestinian genocide, right? And by that I'm referring to it's the last 2 years, not the last 77 years. I'm just referring to this. A lot of institutions that purportedly exist to support writers have done nothing of the sort to protect their voice, to protect their ability to create art in this space, and I've done exactly the opposite. I've done nothing but shore up a type of ideological commitment to the punishment of people who speak out, right? And I think that is not accidental. I think it illustrates where power lies, and the trying to think of a way to put this that's more general, but the solution more generally is always like, well, maybe we can tweak the edges of this thing, right? So the Palestinian genocide is an illustrative example, but let's go on level. When we have an issue in the creation of art about lack of diversity, whether that's across lines of like race, class, gender, whatever, it's never ever allowed to be assessed materially, right? It's like, well, maybe there could be a new initiative, maybe there could be a new scheme or a new prize where actually you just replicate the winner takes all model.
Yeah,
that's caused the problem to begin with. We live in an industry and work in an industry where it is almost a precise replica of the economy at large, where 4 people like make all the money and the rest sort of like live for crumbs. It's a direct replica, as above, so below. We're just seeing the economy. We're not insulated from that because we work in the arts. And really, until we recognize that the way to make a dent in those problems is to see their connectedness with broader social movements around fair wages, labor, housing, working time. All of these are how you actually fix these issues, right? Because art is created when you have time outside of wage labor to do it, and it's as simple as that. And if we don't fight for those things more broadly, it's going to be the preserve of an ever narrower, ever more boring group of kind of like dilettantes producing lifestyle novels. Like, nobody wants that. So we have to embed our thoughts about the creation of art into the wider program of like inequity, not just for creators, but for consumers of art. People need time to read. People need time to go to museums. This is a broad social issue that should concern us all. The song is not bread and bread. The song is bread and roses, and we have to fight for the roses as well as the bread. They're connected things. I sort of failed to not go on a rant there, but
no, not at all. No, it's all good stuff, and I think as well, all of those things you just listed, like the time to kind of getting the balance right between materialism and everything else, none of that benefits those 4 people at the top. So and they will do everything they can to try and stop that. And that's it ties directly to what I was trying to say, that there is power in a collective response, and there's power in the art that people are producing, which I think is it's really important to remember that people aren't out there doing this on their own. I mention this all the time, but there's a book, K Tempest book on connection, which I think I've mentioned in pretty much every episode of this podcast so far. But one of the big things they talk about is that the art that's produced doesn't mean anything until it's been shared, until that connection is actually made. It's fine to sit in a turret and write poems, but they start to mean something, and they start to have a life of their own when someone reads them, and it means something else to that person. And I think, what you just described made me think of that. It's so important that we have the time to both create and consume, art, music, poetry, everything.
And
else.
It's a deeply democratic act as well, I think. Like, you just spot that thought in me is another critique of these kind of instrumental initiatives, like, grant schemes and so on, is that they often take the view that for something to have democratic power or democratic validity, it can't be difficult, or it can't be abstract, or it can't be symbolic, that actually that's maintaining some kind of elitist view. But actually it's more like what you said, I would argue, that inviting a reader to co-create meaning with you as they encounter your work in all of its ambiguities and all of its complexities is a deeply democratic act, because you are co-creating it. Like, that's democracy at the level of the body, That is such deep democracy. It's so much more democratic than patronizingly handing down like nice, easy to read, things for the masses.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's interesting the way all of those issues are connected.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So on that then, so moving forward, that what process do you use to choose which kind of form to tackle specific things? So am I right in saying that you originally had a couple of collections of poetry, you then moved into writing novels, and fair to say Hourglass quite abstract in the way it's written, and then obviously I See Buildings Fall Down. And how do you choose whether a specific topic is more suited to poetry, it's more suited to abstract fiction, more straightforward fiction? What's your train of thought for that?
Yeah, interesting. I think of myself primarily as a novelist.
Mm-hmm.
No, uh, but the reason that is because, and bear with me while I generalize here. Like if one imagines that the hierarchy of concerns in, let's say, fiction traditionally, I'm generalizing, might be something like plot, character, dialogue, and then you keep going down, and you reach rhythm, symbol, motif. All of these things, they're important, but primarily one thinks of plot, character, and so on. Whereas, again, generalizing, but poetry arguably is the other way up, right? You're thinking density of language, metaphor, rhythm, symbol, and then maybe there's a narrative, maybe there's character, maybe there's dialogue, but they tend to be like kind of inverted versions of one another. Well, when I moved into primarily writing fiction, I just took the same list in the same order.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's the same. I still work from the level of rhythm, motif, metaphor, outwards. And so in a sense that I don't hold those hard distinctions, if that makes sense. They don't feel as distinct to me as they might to a reader.
Yeah, which is brilliant. And actually, I think I've had conversations with other people who are like, "Oh no, it's a conscious effort to wear a different hat and to do things." But actually, I think from what you've just described, that makes perfect sense. Having read a lot of your work, there's that the rhythm, I think, is what gives it reality, to the reader, which is incredible. And then I suppose so you've got the poetry, you've got fiction, and I suppose I'm wondering, was it always just heading for TV? Because I'm right in saying the last book is now being adapted or has been adapted. What's the situation there?
Yeah, so it's a feature film, not TV.
Okay.
But yeah, it's done. It's done. It's in post production. I saw a pretty much final version of it quite recently.
Oh, congrats, man! That must be really exciting. Like, were you involved with the process of that, like the writing of it?
Yeah, I've been really heavily involved, which I'm very grateful for, because it's not the norm, and I don't take it for granted that I've been, I'm executive producing on it. I've been involved quite deeply, but that is because, if you don't mind me circling back a little bit, the people involved, which is like the BBC and the BFI and people like that, but specifically the director, Clio Barnard. I don't know if you know her work, but she's one of Britain's great directors, I would argue. So she did like The Selfish Giant and The Arbor, and she's a kind of it would be limiting to call her like an inheritor of the social realist tradition, but it's in that kind of mode, right? So she's the director on it, and the screenwriter is Enda Walsh, who wrote Hunger, Steve McQueen's Hunger, and The Small Things Like These adaptation, and so on. So when they came in from the start, Clio was like, right, what we're going to do here is we're going to set it on the estate that you grew up in, and we'll cast from the community, and we'll embed the actors in the community, and we'll work from the community outwards. We'll spend all our location money in the community. And there was just this real like political and ethical commitment to the project that just put me at ease, because it's the kind of thing that can go terribly wrong, and actually from the outset they kind of got it, and I was always sure it would be a good thing, almost regardless of the film. The process itself would be valuable. And it links to your question about Chardin for me, because it was a return. It's the first time in a long time that I've been there, like significantly, and watching the community rally around the film has been probably the most moving and rewarding artistic experience of my life.
Beautiful.
They had 800 people come out for an open casting, for extras.
That must be mind-blowing.
Yeah, completely wild. I mean, there's kind of a small humorous aside, really, is like the casting director who cast the film is a casting director called Shaheen Baig, who most recently did cast Adolescence, but she also cast all the This Is England films. She's done a bunch of stuff, right, including Peaky Blinders. Now, some Facebook detectives in the local area put two and two together and decided that actually it was a casting for and it was Shaheen Baig, and it was like, well, it's obviously Peaky Blinders. And the local Birmingham newspapers ran with that. Rumours swirl. Peaky
no way.
In Chardin. So he had to put out a communication saying, look, it's not in Peaky Blinders. I'm really sorry. Like, you don't be disappointed. But nonetheless, people turned up, a number of them, like in the flat caps and the braids. Yeah. There was no telling them that it wasn't Peaky Blinders, and it's hard to underestimate how much people in Birmingham love Peaky Blinders. So,
not just Birmingham, I think everywhere. But yeah, amazing. And I messaged you literally minutes after finishing reading the book, so I'm very excited about the film coming out. But I think just to dig into the book a little bit, actually Buildings Fall Out of Lightning, I think the thing that hit me was that the characters were so relatable to me and to other readers. And I've chatted to other writers who have read the book and all said the same thing, and not even about where they grew up. So I didn't grow up in kind of inner city. I grew up in sort of small town Scotland. But I think what struck me was the way in which the characters' lives sort of intersected, whilst also and deviated, but whilst also sort of staying rooted in their shared past with all the accompanying sort of traits, tics, and expectations that come with that. And it got me really thinking. I think I said to you in a message afterwards, I actually picked the phone up to some old friends that I hadn't spoken to for a little while. And I've become aware of, again, looping back to that, I mentioned echo chambers earlier on, that I find it difficult sometimes to link in with old friends who don't exist in the same echo chambers as I do now. And some of them don't engage in causes, whether it's Palestine, which we've spoken about, environmentalism. And reading your book, it struck me that, all of the characters, sort of life got in the way of looking outside of, what they were dealing with in the here and now, which isn't to say they were not well informed. Again, going back to what you said, but you got to Oxford and realised that half of your friends from Chardin could have run rings round people who would have identified as academic and clever. But I'm just interested, what are your thoughts on that existence in sort of online echo chambers versus real life and being busy, sometimes too busy to outwardly give a shit about some of the big topics?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because, you're obviously pointing at something very real there. And there is a part of me that wants to say that it's a false distinction that we hold between our quote unquote everyday life and these broader political issues. It's we all breathe air. We are all political subjects, whether we like it or not, and we shouldn't have to frame it in these terms. But let's just say something that someone like Palestine, for example, that someone might think is some other part of the world that's not related to us. It's like, well, firstly, we were literally involved in creating the conditions that set that up. But equally, colonial boomerang and otherwise means that whatever ethno-nationalist and fascist states get away with in the colonial periphery eventually becomes reflected in the colonial core anyway. So surveillance, policing, the shutting down of dissent, like all of those things impact our quote unquote everyday lives. in this country. So I think it's a false distinction, but I agree with you that it's a distinction that people hold, right? And I think one of the reasons that happens, and we all do it to certain extents, I'm certainly not putting myself above doing that, is we talk a lot, this might seem like a sidebar, but I promise I'm looping back, about precarious labor, right? And the typical image is, the delivery driver or something like that, right? It's precarious labor, 0-hour contracts, all of that kind of thing. Now, that is true. It's a kind of economic and material precarity. But moving out from that economic and material precarity, I think it also creates a psychological precarity. I think when you can't have a stake in capitalism, right? When you're being asked to trade all of your life, all of your time for effectively nothing, not even for a picket fence, a garden, and a kid, right? So you've got this material precarity, you've also got this psychological precarity and this emotional precarity, depending on your point of view, maybe even a psycho-spiritual precarity, because one begins to think, well, what's all this for? What's the meaning of all this? Do I just work and work and work and then die?
It's kind of existing to be exploited type thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you have that multi-layered instability, that multi-layered precarity, it makes some people very, very keen consumers of policies and ideas of safety. If you can make people incredibly insecure on all of those levels, then suddenly policies around safety, whether that's policing, whether that's border control, whether that's the carceral system, suddenly people start drifting towards those ideas. And they will maybe say that, it's because they make sense or whatever. And it's not actually. It's because they're feeling a resonance with their own instability. A false resonance, I should point out, but a resonance nonetheless. So those are some ideas that I have in response to what you said. The other, and I'm sometimes criticized for being a bit of a kind of bleeding heart about this in certain spaces, but I also don't think you can reason people into positions that they didn't reason themselves into. Reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into, right? If they felt their way there, you have to feel their way out, And I don't think we've ever moved anyone through scorn or through argument. Like, it has to be rooted in love. People have to think that you were a project of making life bigger and more beautiful, and that they are part of it. And that's the thing that underpins so much of this. Is it's so easy to think, oh well, this is someone always banging on about Palestine, right? Why are they so angry? Why are they so confrontational? Why are they so objectionable? Well, I can only speak for myself, but I think this goes wider. It's because life is beautiful, right? Life is beautiful and it's worth preserving. And that means that it is not permissible for someone to extinguish beautiful life on the bounds of ethno-nationalism, fascism, ideology, climate collapse, or otherwise, because life is beautiful. If it wasn't beautiful, I wouldn't give a fuck. There would be nothing to fight for. So underpinning all that stuff is a commitment to beauty, I think. And that's the way is into that seeming contradiction that you identified, I would say.
Yeah. It's such a gorgeous way to think about it as well. And I think it ties together a lot of the strands of, what we've discussed today, and it wraps them all up. And I think you're right. I think there's the statement there, if it wasn't beautiful, I wouldn't give a fuck, is a really nice place to bring things to a close. What's next for you? What's on the horizon? What are you working on?
So I've just sold my new novel, which is in some ways a departure. It's do you familiar with the painter Henry Darger? Often pronounced Darger, but he insists on Darger, so I'm going with him. So he's an artist I've been obsessed with since my teenage years, going back to MySpace, my first MySpace profile was a banner was a Henry Darger painting, and I have written the story of Henry Darger's life in his voice, told from his deathbed. So it's on some level completely batshit book, but the response so far has been pretty mind blowing and very moving. Although I would say, even though it spans 1880 to 1970, and the kind of the birth of industrial modernity in Chicago and all the rest of it, my editor, who knows me very well at this point, was like, "It's incredible that you've written a book spanning 100 years in Chicago from a man who never really leaves his room. And actually what you've written about is a book about wage labour and buildings and religiosity." And I was like,
themes, man. Common themes.
Maybe we all just have 2 or 3 themes that we circle around, and that's fine. So anyway, so I'm just finishing up that.
Beautiful. Do you have a release date for that? Will that be next year, or?
Yeah, it'll be right towards the end of next year, so quite a little while yet. And then the other things will just be the first half of next year. Will be film stuff, I think, for IC Buildings, and potentially some other screen stuff, maybe. But that's very early, so I probably shouldn't mention that.
Yeah. Oh well, listen. Thank you so much. And if people want to sort of engage with what you're doing, where's the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, so probably the only social media I use is Instagram. I think I might have some legacies elsewhere, but it's the only one I actually use. It's just my name, I think, all one word. Weird spelling, EI. And that also happens to be my email address. So if it's particularly urgent, go to, I have a website also, myname.com, that has a contact form if someone wanted to get in touch directly about anything, which people do. Usually brilliantly, but sometimes with very strange things. And recently someone sent me an AI generated picture of myself in the back of a taxi holding a bunch of flowers.
Random.
I thought maybe I'll take that contact form off my website, but it's up there for now. So use it while you can.
Oh, listen, thank you so much for today's chat. Thank you for all the work to date, and really excited to see what comes next, both with the film and with the next book. So huge thanks, Keiran. Really appreciate it.
Scott, thanks for having me.